Home. For me, home is where my family is. But there have been times in my life where I was called away from my family for extended periods of time. While I was serving in the Marine Corps, it was hard to be away from my loved ones. But thankfully, I had my squadron family, but other places where we were stationed around the globe became a temporary home. Then, in 2009, I launched the International Space Station, traveling even farther away from my family, conducting science 250 miles above the Earth. The space station was an orbiting home for my crewmates and myself. Talk about a room with a breathtaking view. With Artemis, NASA will send the first woman and the first person of color to the moon. We are going there for the benefit of all here. We'll need a place to orbit around the moon, where we can live and work, a place to get ready for our lunar surface expeditions, and a place to return to when our work on the lunar surface is complete. We need a lunar home away from home. This will be the Gateway. Starting with the power and habitation modules, the Gateway will be the first long-term outpost in lunar orbit humans have ever had. Primed for new discoveries, this orbiting laboratory will provide us with a unique view of our solar system. And it's already becoming a beacon for the future of international and commercial cooperation in space. With increasing capability and longer missions over time, the Gateway will be a powerhouse of technology and science, paving the way for future human missions to Mars. Design and fabrication of Gateway elements by NASA and our international partners is well underway around the world right now. Wherever you are on planet Earth, today you are part of the Artemis generation. I'm NASA astronaut Randy Bresnick, and I invite you to join us by following NASA Gateway on social media and telling us where you call home.
What a terrific opening video on what the meaning of home is for an astronaut. I'm William Harris, President and CEO of Space Center Houston, and I'm so excited to be here today to moderate this panel. Space Center Houston is a dynamic space exploration learning destination where we look at space exploration past, present, and future. And we're also honored to be the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center. I'm pleased to moderate today's panel for World City on a fascinating topic. We're going to talk about from ground up, building a home away from home. Houston is also the home of Apollo Mission Control, where we manage human space missions to the moon, ISS, control room, and other missions that relate to human exploration. And we have a very exciting future planned. We're going to focus today on the return to the moon through the Artemis program and how it will have pave the way for significant lunar exploration, because ultimately we're planning to send humans on to Mars. I'm so excited that today we're going to speak with three professionals who are leads in preparing for humans to go into space, live in space, and thrive in space. The three panelists are Brett Willman, Gateway Halo Program Integration Lead, Michelle Rucker, NASA Human Exploration and Operations Architecture Lead, and Dr. Sharmi Watkins, Assistant Director for Exploration, NASA's Human Health and Performance Directorate. So first, we'll hear from Brett.
Yeah, and to explain what I do, I think it's probably best if I kind of put it in the context of where I work. So the Artemis program is defining the missions that are going to allow us to sustainably explore the moon and develop those technologies that are going to allow us to go to Mars and go beyond into deep space. There are many elements to it. There's the heavy launch capability provided by the Space Launch System, SLS. There's Orion, which is going to transit the crew from Earth to the moon and back again. There is Gateway, and Gateway is going to provide the platform by which we can land on the moon and actually anywhere on the moon. And it's also going to test those deep space exploration systems that are going to allow us to get to Mars. And then there's the Lunar Lander, which is the HLS Human Landing System, which is going to take us from the Gateway to the moon and back again. So I work in the Gateway program. The Gateway program is big in and of itself. It's got multi-elements into it. The first two elements that are going to go live are the power propulsion element and the habitation and logistics outpost, PPE and HALO. So in my job, I am the cross-program integration lead for Halo primarily, but I do both. And I do both because when we go to launch, we are going to launch these two elements being managed by two different centers, two different contractors, Maxar and Northrop Grumman, and we're going to combine these elements at the launch site facility and launch them in one SpaceX-provided Falcon Heavy vehicle. So I am the lead for the integration effort of that. I also deal with international partners integration, which is looking at the interfaces as this module is in orbit. When we have ESA modules come in, or we have the Canadian Space Agency provided robotic systems, I help with and assist with the integration of those onto the spacecraft.
I just want to interject, ESA's European Space Agency.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Sorry. Yeah. So that's my primary role, is to do that cross-program integration.
Wow, that's a lot of coordination.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Michelle.
So I'm from Alaska originally. I moved here to Houston at the height of hurricane season. So extreme environments don't bother me even a little bit. I came to work in the oil industry here in Houston and then switched over to NASA a little bit later in my career. I have the best job ever now. I get to work on the Mars architectures for eventual human missions to Mars. So we're looking at everything from the transportation systems. So for example, the work that Brett's in on Gateway, the solar electric propulsion system, that is one type of transportation architecture that we're looking at. There are nuclear-enabled propulsion systems that we're looking at, and of course the traditional chemical architectures. And not just the vehicles to get us to these different destinations, but the surface systems for either the moon or for Mars. So my team works on everything from surface power systems to mobility systems, how we're going to move around on the surface, what we're going to live in, how we're going to keep the humans healthy and productive. And that's where I get to work with Sharmi a lot, trying to get the humans to these destinations and back again is one thing, but we've got to make them healthy, make sure they're healthy and safe. And so that's where Sharmi and I get to work together.
Great, thank you. Sharmi.
Well, first, thanks for having me. And I am the Assistant Director for Exploration within our Human Health and Performance Group. And my cool job is that I get to communicate with a lot of people regarding the risks of spaceflight. So those hazards that are present in the space environment, the risks then to the human system, and then how we're going to approach and mitigate those risks. So that's a lot of how I work with Brett and Michelle and these different programs that are part of the overall Artemis campaign. We think about what is the right amount of oxygen in a vehicle, what is the right pressure, what can we do to keep the crew not only physiologically safe and healthy, but psychologically safe and healthy. How will we build this home away from home? What are the right components so that this crew that is in tremendous physical and psychological health when they leave Earth are presented with this challenging environment and then thrive there and explore?
I could talk to both of you for hours. It's absolutely fascinating, the work that you each do, but I'm curious, what have we learned over recent years by having astronauts living in space for longer and longer periods of time? We know that during the Apollo program, the goal was to prove we could get to the moon and come back. And the astronauts were on the moon initially for less than 24 hours. But now we have long duration missions. With astronauts, you think of Mark Vande Hei is now going to be on station for over a year, or nearly a year. And so what have we learned that's helping us prepare to send astronauts on to live in habitats on the moon and Mars?
From a health perspective, we just have so many more subjects and a very diverse group of subjects now after 20 years on the International Space Station. We've built, in epidemiologic terms, we built our N. We have a lot of subjects that we know many things about. We also have characterized the environments a lot better over time, so we can speak to the radiation environment in low Earth orbit. We understand the deep space radiation environment better. We have a sense of how human physiology changes not only in the short term, but also over the course of months, and now getting to multiple people who have flown for either a year or very close to it. So just building our experience base of what normal human physiology does in response to this environment.
So Michelle, I'm curious, what are some of the unique challenges with Mars, sending humans onto Mars compared to being on ISS or even the moon?
So first, just the distance to get to Mars and back again, that round trip, because the moon is a fairly it's fairly close. It's in our cosmic backyard. Mars and Earth chase each other around the sun, and so when we leave Earth to head to Mars, Earth isn't where we left it when we try to come back again. So it's a very long duration, long distance trip to get there and back again. So the sheer distance makes a Mars mission perhaps 2 to 3 years long. That's much longer than even our longest space station experience to date. So one of the fantastic things about space station is it's given us that, a little bit of data for how the humans can perform for long periods of time in space. When we get to Mars, we've got to get landed. So far, the biggest thing we've ever landed on Mars is are the Curiosity and Perseverance rovers. Those are about a metric ton. For human scale landers, we're looking at perhaps 20 times larger landers or even larger. So what we call the entry, descent, and landing challenge is make sure that we have a nice soft landing. And then once we get there, Mars has a little bit more gravity than the moon. Not as much as Earth, but it's got a little bit of atmosphere and a little bit more gravity. So then we've got to do the ascent portion of that flight again. So if you've ever been down to the Kennedy Space Center, you see how elaborate the launch preparations are. Now we have to think about doing that sort of an operation on Mars, which could involve putting some robotic assets there to prepare things to be able to do that ascent portion. And then, of course, all the health. Just you can have a dusty environment. Slips, trips, and falls are something we worry about almost everywhere. We have to design our spacecraft so that
sounds like life here on Earth.
It's just exactly
slips, trips, and falls, right? Yeah.
So we work with Sharmi to make sure that our spacecraft are designed so that you don't have an accident in a remote location where it's going to be difficult for us to help keep the crew healthy. And then, of course, just the as you said, the psychological aspects of it. You're on these very long missions. It's a relatively small number of people in an enclosed environment. You've got radiation. The deep space environment is hard on the health of the crew. So our job is to try to develop systems that can get you there and back as fast as we can and be productive and keep the crew healthy while they're at the destination.
But that's actually where Artemis comes in. Yeah. Artemis is going to demonstrate those technologies. There are going to be missions to the Gateway where we're going to have crew stay on Gateway and crew that are going to go to the ground, and they're going to be there from 30 to 60 to 90 days. And we have to develop the environmental systems that are going to be regenerative. Because going to Mars, you're not going to have the logistics you have going to low Earth orbit or even to the moon. So you've got to cultivate those and develop those. And so she helps to come up with what we need to do, but then we need to demonstrate those, and that's where the Artemis comes in.
So define what regenerative means for the audience.
So regenerative, it would be if I'm breathing out carbon dioxide or if I'm sweating in the environment or releasing fluids, that we have systems that take those fluids back in and then put them back into the components and then put them back into the system as oxygen and water that we can use. And so when we talk about building a home away from home, these are the things that we have to deal with. I mean, when you're building a city, you got to worry about power. You got to worry about waste management. All things that we have to deal with when we're going to the moon or going to Mars. And you have to do it in a very different way, because whereas with the city, you're going to have logistics supply chains and you're going to have the ability to take outside resources in. When you're going to Mars and the moon, you don't necessarily have that capability readily at your hands. And then on top of that, you have to have systems that are autonomous. Can do this without with minimal crew interaction. And that's, again, where Gateway and Artemis come in.
One of the topics you mentioned was surface power, and that is a really interesting one for Mars. You may have heard about the Opportunity rover that was relying on solar power. Big dust storm popped up on Mars, wasn't getting enough energy, and unfortunately the rover didn't survive that. We can't work that way with humans, right? We need an uninterruptible power supply. Mars has a day-night cycle. It's subject to these dust storms. So one of the things that we're going to be using Artemis for is to demonstrate a fission surface power system on the moon. It's actually being designed to the Mars specifications. So we'll build it for Mars, test it on the moon, and then we'll be ready to go back to Mars with it.
is absolutely fascinating. Well, it makes me think of some of the work that's happened on ISS, right? Because we have some regenerative systems, and so they're kind of proof of concept as we prepare to go on back to the moon and then ultimately on to Mars. So I'm curious with Artemis program and HALO, how will it actually work? How will those transport systems working to get to the moon and back, and what will be some of the things that the astronauts will be doing?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer it fully. The habitation and logistic outpost and Gateway is that's one element of Gateway. So there's other elements that are coming on that build that full entire capability. So HALO in and of itself is not a regenerative system. Now it has nitrogen and oxygen tanks, and it can keep the vehicle pressurized, and it plays a role in the Gateway system. The European Space Agency, ESA, is providing the International Habitation Module, and they're working with JAXA to develop those regenerative ECLIS systems, environmental systems. So I don't know if I can answer that question fully of how they work, but HALO plays a role in it.
So this is going to be actually, HALO will be orbiting the moon. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. So that's actually a whole new architecture to have a vehicle that's actually in orbit around the moon. So what's the advantage of having a vehicle like that orbiting the moon as opposed to going directly to the lunar surface from Earth?
Well, you're in the deep space environment. So with ISS, you're in a low Earth environment, low Earth orbit environment, and you have the magnetosphere around the Earth protects that, even up at 200 miles above Earth, protects the space station. When you're out on the moon, you're actually dealing with the environments that you would in the transit to Mars. So when you're talking about building systems for that, you have to deal with that environment, which includes radiation. And so we have to develop those systems to be radiation hardened, and that's not an easy thing to do. And it touches on actually how does that radiation affect humans. So the idea is if you have that mock or analog to a transit to Mars around the moon, orbiting the moon, well, then we can run the experiments there, the research there, and if we have a problem, we're only a couple of days away. We're not, as she was saying, 6-9 months or however long it takes to get back. And I'm sure Sharmi can speak a lot more to what the effects that environment does to the human and what we're doing regarding that.
So one of the things Gateway will do for us is allow visiting vehicles to come. And our Mars transportation system would be one of those visiting vehicles. Mm-hmm. So before we head off to Mars, what we're thinking we'd like to do is take our Mars transit habitat, which would have advanced life support systems on it, some of these regenerative systems, and we would visit Gateway with it and do some what we call sea trials, where you test that system for months or years in advance of the first human Mars mission, just to make sure, again, if something goes wrong, if something breaks down, we're much closer to home to be able to send repair parts and to get some time on systems and understand how those systems work. So the Gateway offers a very stable platform for these visiting vehicles to continue the research that we've started on ISS, but we'll continue out at Gateway in preparation for going to Mars.
Well, it's interesting. I think we all have a level of empathy for this long duration space flight after the past year and a half, because I think most of the world has had to be in isolation or limit its activity during this time. What have you learned about helping people endure isolation or being away from friends and family that helps to keep them well, that will help inform these missions?
Sure, it has been a very important learning experience for all of us. So this pandemic experience for many of us shows the importance of staying connected. And whether that connection happens synchronously or asynchronously, we need to be in touch with the people we love. We need to know how people are doing. We need to feel connected to our work, whether or not we're physically present in the workplace. So great lessons coming there. Of course, we've had experience in other remote environments, and our astronauts spend significant time in different analog facilities learning how to cope with just these things. So they were maybe a little bit ahead of the rest of us in this pandemic process. They understand what it's like to be in a remote and challenging environment. They understand what it means to communicate asynchronously. They know how to care for themselves in periods where they may not have lots of resources. So I think we're ahead of the game when it comes to understanding those stressors and some mitigations we can put in place.
Could you talk a little bit about the analog environments? It's something that I'm familiar with, but like Hera and others, but
Sure.
our audience may not be. So what are some of the analog environments that astronauts and volunteers participate in to help us gain insights?
Right, we have several of them. So one you mentioned was Hera, which is the Human Exploration Research Analog, and that is an analog facility at the Johnson Space Center where we can put a crew of 4 in the facility that is a little bit like an outpost with their sleep stations, their workstations, et cetera. It's a relatively small facility, and we can give them mission-like tasks. We can have them do virtual reality EVAs. We can have them follow a timeline similar to the one you see on ISS. And we can give them the psychological stressors that go along with being away from your family and friends for long periods of time. We can insert communications delay, et cetera. So that is a really interesting facility that's very close by. We have some other maybe more exotic facilities that we take advantage of, like the Antarctic. We send our crew to spend some time in the Antarctic. Some of our astronauts spend time searching for meteorites in the snow and spending time really on the ice in remote environments. And some have even been physicians that are then the physician for that expedition, which I think is really neat. We also have an underwater habitat called NEMO, and I believe that's NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations off the Florida Keys. Submerged at a depth of, I believe it's about 60 feet, but I may be wrong on that. But that's another really neat environment to look at also pressure effects. And certainly heading out of that habitat and scuba diving is a lot like going on an EVA. You're relying on these external systems to provide your oxygen, et cetera. So those are some of the neat environments we participate in.
Well, I've actually seen that they're creating an analog at Johnson Space Center with a 3D printer for Mars.
Yes.
And that is absolutely fascinating. Could any of you speak about that
Sure,
habitat?
that's called CHAPIA, and that comes out of that Human Health and Performance group. We have some of our experts are the lead scientists on that project. And so CHAPIA stands for, Crew, Health, and Performance Exploration Analog. And it is going to be a facility a little like the Hera facility I told you about. It's going to be co-located, and this is a larger habitat that's meant to simulate a Mars mission. And so Michelle and her team and others have given input to what that layout might look like, how much square footage we should allocate to various things. And of course, we'll be able to play around with things like the configuration of the sleeping quarters. How much personal space do you really need? And does that change over time? Can we grow our own foods? How much socializing space do you need? Do you need independent workstations, or is it better to have places where people can come together and work communally? So we'll learn a lot about food systems as one of the primary goals of that. They'll look at growing food, and they'll also be really testing out, if we provide you with a food system, how long is it before you're bored with those foods? Those foods not only need to supply your body from a nutritional standpoint, just give you those basic elements, but that it needs to be good tasting. It needs to be something that is providing nourishment to your soul as well. So there's the environment in which you consume the food, there's the taste, there's the texture, so much of that. And if we're going to send somebody on a mission to Mars that's going to be measured in months and years, certainly we need to know what we need to do with that food system to keep you interested and healthy.
Well, I think so many people think of frozen astronaut ice cream you get at lots of stores that we sell in Space Center Houston. Of course, they don't eat that anymore, but it's the same process of dehydration of something, right?
Right.
Because water is the greatest weight in food. And I've had the good fortune of going to the food lab at NASA Johnson Space Center and sampling some of the food, and it's actually quite good. I have to say, and the variety is quite remarkable.
That's one of the cool things about working at the Johnson Space Center is we can volunteer to be food testers. So a lot of us have done that. That's a fun thing to do. But don't forget about ISS. ISS has been a great analog. Our team is working with ISS, just understanding the logistics, because when we go to Mars, we can't resupply stuff, right? Whatever you've got with you, that's what you got. If you run out of something, it's going to be difficult to get a resupply mission. So you either pre-deploy your cargo, so what's waiting for you there, or you make sure you take everything you need with you. So all of the work that we've done on ISS to help track, what are you running out of regularly? Did you take too many of this one thing and not enough of this other thing? So even just little things like that, when you're in a volume constrained environment, it's really important to understand and not either overpack or underpack. We've all gone on vacation and you know, the weather wasn't what you expected and you turned out not to have the right clothes. So we need to make sure that we have the right stuff. So these analogs, especially these long duration ones, really help us understand what we need to pack for the trip to Mars.
So what are some of the goals of Artemis? What do we hope to learn through the Artemis program to inform a mission ultimately to Mars?
Goals of Artemis, like, you know, we're trying to set the stage of being able to understand where we are in deep space and being able to get to Mars, right? You know, the goals, we want to be able to sustainably get to take the next step into space, and we want to be able to do it sustainably. So we can get to low Earth orbit, great. We're going to start commercializing that, and I think that's awesome. So now we need to push the frontier, and that's where Artemis is. We're pushing the frontier to the moon. So we're trying to figure out how to sustainably go to the moon and be able to explore it in a way that we haven't done in the past. The previous Apollo missions were all right around the equator, lunar vicinity, went direct into low lunar orbit, and then landed and came back. With the Artemis mission, Gateway is going to be a halo orbit, which is a very eccentric orbit that goes close to the moon and then really far away, and then it comes back and gets close to the moon. So it's about a 7-day orbit to even get around the moon. But what that allows you, allows you to land anywhere you want on the moon. So we can explore the South Pole. We can go back to an Apollo site if there was some value to go back to another Apollo site. And then, of course, demonstrate all of those technologies that we've been talking about to get to Mars. And since it is in our backyard, it provides the flexibility that if something doesn't go right, we can come back. So, you know, the goal is to get us to Mars. I mean, that is our primary goal with Artemis, to get us to Mars.
Well, you know, it's very interesting. Now the astronaut corps is quite different than it was in the 1960s. At the beginning of the space program, there were primarily test pilots who had a really high threshold for danger and understood that being a test pilot could be fatal. And now we have a corps that really represents humanity, right? We have both men and women. We have people of different physical body types, of different backgrounds. How do you hope this will contribute to the success of the Artemis mission? I know that NASA has put out that they were going to have the first woman and the first person of color going to the moon in the coming years. What are your thoughts on including a greater diversity of people in the space program?
I think from a human health perspective, one of the really neat things we can do, in addition to including more people in space, we can learn about how space affects men and women and different people differently. And so I think that is a huge value, because as we chip away at understanding physiology in space, we can't help but learn about physiology, period. And I think we can take that back within medicine and apply it in lots of different areas. So we're learning about new syndromes that can occur in space. We have different findings that have emerged over the course of our time on the International Space Station. And I think when we dive deep into space physiology, there's always something we can learn. And then on a personal level, I think it's incredibly exciting to see different people going into space. I think it's really important for our kids to look up and see someone that they can recognize, somebody that means something to them. That's a person, that's a face, and I identify with that person. And so to me, there's a ton of value with that as well.
I'll tell you, the diversity is huge. I see it across the board. In my cross-program integration role, I get the ability to work with industry partners like Northrop Grumman, Maxar, Lockheed Martin, SpaceX, and then I get to work with international partners, you know, Canadian Space Agency, European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, and they have their subcontractors that I work with, and you get so many different ideas and ways of tackling problems that you might not have looked at it from, you know, the narrow scope that my teams might be looking at it. And that diversity just brings out the best in everyone. I've seen it so many times.
Wow, that is fantastic. Well, I'm so fascinated by this conversation, and I'm wondering, will we be sending humans to Mars within the next decade? You know, there's been a goal by the 2030s. Do any of you are you betting people? Do you have a sense of when, at one point in the future, might we have humans going to Mars?
Technologically, I think 2030s is doable. I think we understand enough about the challenges, a little bit of engineering, we could solve the technical challenges. you know, in the 1960s when we first sent humans to the moon, we didn't stay very long, not because of the rocket science, but because of the limitations of the humans. And so over the last 50 years, we've learned a lot about how to keep the humans happier and healthier and more productive. There's still some more work to do on that. So we've still got some challenges that we need to work on there. Ultimately, it will depend on, you know, budgets and priorities.
Policy, risk acceptance, what level of risk are we willing to accept in a particular mission? There's a lot of different factors that, you know, I agree, 2030s I think is achievable, but there's a lot that plays, that goes into that.
One thing that helps is we've, you know, back in the 60s, there were very few players in this area. Now we've got pretty robust commercial launch services for low Earth orbit. We've got, through Artemis, and some of the other robotic science contracts that are happening, there are a lot of new players that are developing the in-house skills and the technologies and the processes to be able to help us. So, and of course the international partners, we've got so many more international partners with us now than even when we first started with Space Station. So there's just a lot of people coming to bear on this problem. So yeah, if we can.
And if we do it right, the Artemis will transition to a commercial business. If we can find the interest and the reason to go to the moon, and I believe it's there, then we will find that commercially there'll be an economic incentive to go to the moon. And if there's an economic incentive to go to the moon, that just frees up the resources for NASA to invest in going to Mars.
So for the lunar mission for Artemis, how long will astronauts be living on the South Pole?
So the goal is to do Mars analogs. Initially, what we're thinking is about a 30-day Mars mission would be sort of the minimum. It's a long way to go and not stay, you know, at least 30 days. So that's fairly easy to analog on the moon. Of course, we'll analog it here. We'll analog it on Space Station. We'll analog it on these other platforms. But a 30-day analog on the moon would be a good starting point. And then depending on how much infrastructure we want to invest in on both the moon and eventually on Mars, we can increase the durations. But so baby steps here. You know, we were only on the moon a few days the last time around. So jumping from that to a month, that's a big jump right there. So that's going to be the first goal, is try to get at least 30 days.
Wow, that is so exciting. So I do think at some point there'll be tourism to the moon. Look, we now have people orbiting Earth for a few days. Ultimately, we've got tourists who've been going to our International Space Station. You know, there's the advent of additional space stations that are going into space. We have a company here in Houston, Axiom, that is going to be adding on to ISS, and that's ultimately becoming an independent space station. So it wouldn't surprise me that within a decade you could go on a vacation to the moon and spend a few days there. Would you all go to the moon?
I would.
Sure.
If my wife would let me. My family, should I say.
Well, you know, I wanted to ask how you all got to do what you're doing. It's absolutely fascinating, the work that you do. So how is it that you got to be in the roles that you're in currently at NASA?
Well, I can start. I mean, so for me, it's been a passion of mine since I was a kid. When I saw the shuttle flights and I saw the astronauts floating in space and making these bubbles, and that just blew my mind. So from a very young age, I knew I wanted to be either an astronaut or work in the space industry. Now you get into middle school and high school and you start realizing, well, I mean, how feasible is it? What does it mean to work in the space industry? I loved computers too. So I took that and went into the computer field, and I went to college and got a couple degrees in computer engineering. And you know, it was I graduated at an awkward time. It was right after 9/11, and it was the .com bubble burst. So you know, computer science. And I went up to the NASA booth and I said, "This is my last. You know, this might be my last opportunity to work in the space industry." And you know, and sure enough, I had an interview with Steve Kerner that day, and you know, got the opportunity to go interview for a couple of jobs. And then once I got into NASA, you know, they're really it's great to work for. They develop you. And so I was able to be a flight controller for 5 years. Then I got to work in ISS and the program office for 5 years. They gave me the opportunity to be in an advancement program that enabled me to be where I am today. So you know, you just get, I'd say you have to have a passion for it, and then you be able to apply what you're good at and then do it.
Wonderful. And Michelle, how about for you? I know you come from Alaska. I'm really curious about how you ended up in Houston.
Well, I'm old enough that I have distinct memories of watching Apollo 11, walking down the ladder on the moon. And I apparently announced to my parents that I was going to be working for NASA when I was 6 years old. So that's how I started on the path. And that's actually why I came to Houston for college, because Houston seemed to be where the action was at. I was hired right after the Shuttle Challenger accident, and was sent to the White Sands Test Facility in New Mexico to do some of the initial the testing that was involved in the accident investigation. And that was a really great job. We were doing hazardous testing out there. So we set stuff on fire, and we would shoot at it with micrometeoroid guns. Sometimes we'd set it on fire and then shoot it, or vice versa. It was just the best job ever. But at some point, when you get tired of destroying spacecraft and you want to create, so then I moved here back to Houston and worked in the shuttle station and constellation programs before I got into exploration. And so as Brett said, I don't know anybody here that's not just passionate and didn't know they wanted to do this when they were, very young. It's rare to come across a NASA employee who just sort of fell into it later. This is something that we've wanted to do for a long time. And I get to work with just such incredibly talented people, and like Sharmi here. And what's funny is we've been working together for a couple years now, and but with pandemic, we haven't actually met. Today is the first time we've actually been in the same room together because we've been working remotely for so long. So yeah, it's kind of fun.
Wonderful. Sharmi, how about you?
Well, 3 for 3 on the childhood dreams here. I am the same. I've always been interested in space since I was very young. I think when I was in high school, I was given a list of possible topics for a book report, and one of them was space medicine. And I didn't know space medicine was a career area. I have a dad who is a family practice physician, now retired, and an uncle who was an aerospace engineer and a pilot. And I'd always looked at their careers and thought, oh, there are elements of those things that I like. And then I found out that there was a career path that married the two, and of course that was where I wanted to head. So I went to college knowing what I wanted to do. I went to MIT and I did my undergrad degree in aerospace engineering, and I did my pre-med courses at the same time. Went straight on to medical school here at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Then I did my Master of Public Health there, did 2 residencies, internal and aerospace medicine, now board certified in both. And coming out of that, straight to NASA. That's what I wanted to do. So I started in the NASA Human Research Program, working with the Exploration Medical Group there. And that's the group that develops the medical systems and concepts for the moon and for Mars. So had a little teaser there of what it would be like to work exploration. And then started to work as a subject matter expert, partnered with some of our commercial crew partners, which was really interesting and exciting to explain some of our NASA requirements and what have we learned and why did we learn it, and work with those teams that are actually building the vehicle. So really neat experience to work commercial crew. And then I got to work International Space Station as the flight surgeon for several increments over the last few years. So that was, again, incredible experience. And made my way back to exploration. And of course now working with Michelle, working with Brett, really enjoying that idea of communicating the needs of the human to make sure that it's infused early in these Artemis missions.
I'm just blown away with all of your backgrounds and qualifications. It's quite remarkable. What's also exciting is that you've been able to explore different areas and actually follow your passions and your interests. So where do you see yourselves in, say, 5 years or 10 years from now?
For me, I know it's somewhere here. There's amazing, as Brett was mentioning, NASA's a great organization because in addition to having lots of opportunities at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, we have centers all over the country and lots of opportunities. So I can say with confidence it will be a NASA job. Which one? I guess we'll see where life takes us.
How about for you, Michelle?
In 5 years, I expect we'll all be sitting in a control room somewhere watching what's happening on the moon and cheering for the work that we're going to be doing on the moon.
Wonderful. How about for you, Brett?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I'm not gonna say I'm taking my boss's jobs anytime soon. No, I see myself being in the program. I want to be able to lead some of these future technologies and future missions that are gonna expand human knowledge. Where it takes me, I don't know right now. I am focused on the mission at hand, which is getting our co-manifested power propulsion element and Halo module launched and successfully in orbit. And I think that would be around the time frame in which where's the next opportunity? Mm-hmm. If something comes up sooner, well, then you just kind of take it. But I'm really focused on what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Houston really is a city of innovation, right? It's a city where kind of the pillars of our innovation here, of course, aerospace and aviation, where you all work in, healthcare, because we have, of course, the largest medical center in the world here, the energy sector, of course, which Houston's very well known for. So how has that supported you in what you're doing here? How has it been for you living in Houston as a city that's focused on kind of those three pillars of industry?
That's a tough one for me to answer. In my role, I haven't spent much in collaboration with those industries. I have family that works in those industries, and I get to see a different view of how some of those companies work from the inside, and be able to see what how they're organized, and be able to compare and contrast that against how space exploration and some of the contractors I work with and with NASA. And it's very different, and so it's a real hard one for me to give you a good answer to.
Mm-hmm.
I started in the oil industry. I interned in the oil industry when I was in college, doing downhole drilling technology. And when I left and came to NASA, I thought that was going to be it. And now we're talking about drilling on Mars. And so suddenly the skill set that I had from very early in my career is suddenly relevant again, because when we talk about how we're going to drill for water, for minerals, for resources on either the moon or Mars, I'm like, oh, I know about that. So that was a really interesting confluence of those different industries. We work with the drilling industry a lot. Of course, Sharmi can tell you, a lot of the folks we work with on the human health side, they're emergency room doctors on the weekend, down at the Houston Medical Center. So Houston is really unique in that there's that really mix of great industries and also great universities. There's just so many educational opportunities in Houston as well.
Mm.
So I would say the work that we do is so multidisciplinary. It's really great to be in a city with multidisciplinary strengths. There's a lot, with my background doing engineering and medicine, I see the intersection of those two fields kind of everywhere I look, and folks might think of that initially as not being mutually, complementary, but I do think it is. And similarly, one of the things is we're working in three pretty different areas, but when we get together and talk, we realize how much we have to strengthen each other. And similarly, I think when we speak outside with our Houston partners, there's a conference called Pumps and Pipes. And you would think, well, we have a heart that's a pump and we have blood vessels that are pipes, right? You can learn so much from oil and gas, from just terrestrial medicine, et cetera. So we're finding great intersections.
Wonderful. Well, I think our time is coming to an end, and I want to thank the three of you so much for having this conversation today and sharing all the incredible work that you're doing to prepare to send humans back to the moon as a proving ground for Mars. And I know that many exciting things are going to come from that. I understand that we're going to close out our conversation today with a special video. So again, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And as we leave the moon, we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return.
You probably dreamed of this.
Liftoff on Apollo 11.
You probably replayed this moment 1,000 times.
All four wheels off the ground air.
You probably imagined the awe-inspiring indescribable rush of the ride. You probably celebrated the miraculous, cheered the momentous, and mourned the shocking. You probably still dream of what could be. We did. We do. And while many thought we were through, no. We've been learning, we've been building, we've been training. And now, it's time. Because the next frontier is not just for the next generation. It's for this generation. It's for me, and it's for you. For everything we still dream about. We go as Artemis.